let's. So I wanted to first discuss your responses to. So the question that I gave last week was, given that ETFs appear to be everything that traditional mutual funds are, and then some, why haven't traditional mutual funds died out yet? The question being, why do we still have traditional mutual funds, right? I mean, so the answers were actually interesting. I mean, the point is that if something is this, we have this product initially, and then something else comes along, and it's seemingly everything that this is, and then has certain other advantages, then it would seem like almost everybody should migrate over time. And ETFs have been around for 20 years, so enough time for them to have taken over the marketplace. And they haven't. Both continue to thrive. So the question is why? So you guys had an interesting set of answers, which sort of ranged from mutual funds have not died out because there's still many of them. I think that begs the question, why are there many of them still? So that's not really then mutual funds seem to be a more reliable long-term investment. I'm not reading the whole response. I'm just reading sentences here and there. Mutual funds seem to be more reliable for a long-term investment. I'm not sure what reliable means. There also isn't an individual trading fee like the ETFs. I think there's some confusion here, and we'll talk about that. Mutual funds are just a better option for those who want to steadily grow their investment rather than trade it as if it were a regularly traded stock. So basically, this person seems to suggest that you cannot use stocks to build your capital, but that's what you do. So why is ETF any different? To say that that somehow being able to trade it like a stock is a detriment to building capital, that's not true. We do that with stocks all the time. We buy and hold. What's special about ETFs then? So that's not correct. Traditional mutual funds have not died out yet because they're difficult to get rid of. Yeah, they just absorb those bullets and keep getting up. They have been there for a long time, and they are more ideal and reliable. No, not really. I mean, they've been there for a long time, true. But I don't know what ideal and reliable mean any more so than any risky asset, right? The main reason that they have not died out is the fact that they are so old. Wouldn't that be the reason why they die out? Because they're old? So then somebody asked me the question, so do you think they will ever die out? Now that's not really, you don't ask a question with a question. No credit for that one. This is a question, this is not me. You can ask me questions all day long, but not in this forum. I mean, you can ask questions of each other or maybe provide some solutions, but that's okay, but not this. For the long game, it is safer to invest money in mutual funds and ETFs to diversify your portfolio. If you have money in only one, your investments have a greater chance of changing rapidly. Well, that isn't answering the question. The question is, why do they continue to exist? I mean, it's a nice answer, but it doesn't address the question. I think there's some confusion about fees and stuff. So let me be clear. So with traditional funds, there is the load, as we call it, load fees, which we looked at, right? We looked at 1%, 2%, 1.5%, and so on. That's a management fee that you have to pay every year. It's not a one-shot fee. It's a fee you have to pay every year. That includes things like when a fund has to pay capital gains tax on its holdings, then they pass it down to you, the holders. The mutual fund isn't paying any of that. They're simply passing down those costs to the shareholders of that mutual fund. That gets all tacked into this fee, a load that you pay, which includes 12b-1 fees, which is basically a fee that funds incur to publicize themselves, to take ads out. Believe me, you as a shareholder of the fund, you are paying for those ads that a fund might take out. So ETFs do not have those funds. You're not paying load. with ETFs. Because ETFs primarily are index-driven funds, so they are really not actively managed in that sense, because most ETFs have some index connection to them. So they are tracking up some portion of the index, some index somewhere, most of them. And therefore, so the advantage is that they are sort of like indexes, index-type mutual funds, but with a much finer coverage on indices than traditional funds. They look at a much narrower section of indices. I think the major reason why they continue to exist is that they cater to two different markets. Now, this sort of is, there's some of you got parts of it correct. So the reason they exist is not because they've been around for a long time, or that because they're reliable, or they've been, none of that. None of that matters, because ultimately, none of that matters. Either, if it doesn't serve a purpose, you're not going to be around. That's it. It's a harsh, cruel world. So they have to have something. They have to have some benefit to some people. The benefit is, so they are not identical in the sense that ETFs are more index-like, right? So, and that's an advantage, and people may not want only index funds or ETFs. If you want something more actively managed, then your option is basically to go to the traditional mutual fund domain. So that's one reason. A lot of people are indifferent, frankly. If you are a long-term holder, you can be indifferent between those two options, and you can just pick one randomly. Or you pick both in different cases. You buy some mutual funds, and other times you trade ETFs. So, and a lot of times, people do not directly invest in mutual funds, but indirectly they invest in mutual funds through their retirement accounts. So that's not to be forgotten, because traditional mutual fund, all these big TIAA, CREF, and these other big retirement fund management companies buy traditional mutual funds. They don't buy ETFs. Generally, there are ETF funds you can get, but for the most part, they're in mutual funds, traditional funds. So they do have a benefit to certain sectors that look for mutual funds rather than ETFs, because these are going to be holding positions for a long, long time on behalf of their clients. Now, people who have a greater need to trade more frequently will probably gravitate towards ETF. So they have different purposes. That's the answer, is that the reason they continue to coexist and will continue to coexist in the future is because they serve different audiences for different needs. Not because they've been around for a long time, not because they're old, not because they're, none of that. Not because they're convenient, nothing. They're both convenient or inconvenient, depending on what your outlook is, right? Because depending on what your objective is. If your objective is to have the flexibility to trade anytime you want, then of course ETF will be it, because there you can do so. But if that's not something you look for, then it doesn't matter. Right? Any questions? All right, I'm not going to post anything this week simply because you have the exam next week, so we'll just let this week slide by. I want to start with bonds, and so we want to start with talk about bonds, but before we